This is Dr. Ben Weitz with the Rational Wellness Podcast, bringing you the cutting edge information on health and nutrition from the latest scientific research and by interviewing the top experts in the field. Please subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast on iTunes and YouTube, and sign up for my free ebook on my website by going to drweitz.com. Let's get started on your road to better health. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thank you so much for joining me again today. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, please go to iTunes and give us a ratings and review. That way more people can find out about the Rational Wellness Podcast. Our topic for today is the health benefits of medicinal mushrooms with Jeff Chilton. Jeff studied ethnomycology at the University of Washington in the late 1960s. He's worked in the mushroom business since then. He worked in the mushroom production. He worked in mushroom production at a mushroom farm. He's organized educational conferences on mushrooms. He wrote a highly acclaimed book, The Mushroom Cultivator, and he started Namax, a medicinal mushroom company that sells mushrooms wholesale and also retail. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today.
Dr. Weitz, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So why don't you tell us how you got interested in mushrooms and in their benefits?
Well, you know what? I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle area, and it's an area that is wet. We get a lot of rain up here. We've got beautiful forests. And because of our climate, which is a mild maritime climate that's especially wet in the fall, we get an abundance of wild mushrooms coming up. And that was fascinating to me. I got out when I was younger and did some wild mushroom hunting. And then when I went to university, my major actually was anthropology, but I also studied some mycology, and really what I did was I kind of blended the two together, and I did a lot of work on the use of mushrooms worldwide in cultures, whether it be for food, for medicine, or also the use of mushrooms in shamanism. And as you know, in the 60s, we practiced a lot of shamanism.
I assume by shamanism you mean the psychedelic properties.
Yeah, that's right. we didn't have a set of rules to go by, unfortunately, so we were flying a little bit blind. But you know what? We were discovering a lot of things, and we were sort of, in a sense, creating a new culture. And you know, Dr. Weiss, a part of that culture too was looking at the food we were eating and deciding, hey, there's something wrong about the diet that we're being fed. So there were a lot of things going on back then that we were essentially rejecting and trying to find out more information about.
Great. So let's talk about some of the health benefits of mushrooms. I know one of the first things that comes to mind from what I know is the immune strengthening properties. Maybe you can talk about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, the interesting thing about mushrooms is that in the cell wall of a mushroom, they have compounds called beta-glucans.
Okay.
And that makes up almost 50% of the cell wall of all mushrooms. But what's interesting is that these beta-glucans each mushroom has a little bit different architecture of that beta-glucan. And the structure or the architecture of that beta-glucan determines how immunologically active it is. So just eating mushrooms, no matter which mushroom we eat, we are going to get those beta-glucans, but certain mushrooms have medicinal properties where the beta-glucan has a structure that will actually activate immune cells. And what's really interesting is that we have receptor sites in our small intestine that are very specific to these beta-glucans, these fungal beta-glucans. So when those beta-glucans go down there, they hit those receptor sites, and then that will activate the production of different immune cells. And so that is what I would say is that is the really the key underlying benefit to almost all of what we would call medicinal mushroom. And you can get those benefits either through eating mushrooms or supplementing mushrooms. Of course, when you supplement with mushrooms, you're not going to have to take quite as much because it might be in a little more concentrated form. But still,
if we're gonna eat mushrooms, how much mushrooms do we have to eat to get a therapeutic benefit? Let's say somebody's taking mushrooms to help with some health condition, or some people use them as part of their cancer protocol. How large a serving of mushrooms, and how many times a day would you have to eat them to get a therapeutic amount?
Well, in terms of eating mushrooms, what I would say is probably to get a therapeutic amount, you'd want to eat about 100 grams. And 100 grams, I think that would be about 4 ounces. And look, you think, oh, 4 ounces or 100 grams, that seems like a lot. Not a lot. I the other day I weighed up a common button mushroom that you see in all the supermarkets, and I weighed up a medium-sized button mushroom, and it weighed 40 grams. Well, that basically is an ounce and a half or something. So really, in terms of fresh mushrooms, you don't have to eat that much. But what I would say is what's important is cooking them properly, for one. You know what happens is that, and I've heard it for 40 years, ever since I got into the mushroom business, was, oh yeah, mushrooms, man, they are slimy. They are, one thing or the other. People just have this conception of mushrooms like, no, you have to cook them in a hot pan. You have to cook them where I like to slice them about a 1/4 inch thick, throw them into your favorite oil, whatever you want to cook them in. Hot pan, brown both sides of them. Cook them a little bit longer than shorter, so that when they come out of that pan, they're not wet and soggy. They're dry because, or if anything, they've maybe got a little bit of oil. But if you brown them up, and then to me, if I'm just going to eat the mushrooms alone, or even like I did a couple nights ago with a steak, and I'm a meat eater, I just put a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. Oh man, they were delicious. And the thing about it is they go with about anything. So you can put them into stir fries, you can put them into your eggs, but again, cook them properly. Otherwise, you're going to go, oh man, the texture is not so good. These were dry and almost a little bit crunchy. They're really tasty.
Can you get the medicinal value eating them raw?
You know what? I would not recommend eating mushrooms raw. I think, generally speaking,
You see them on salad bars sometimes.
You know what? It's not like it's going to harm you in any way. It won't harm you in any way. And if you like to eat them raw, go right ahead.
But you might not get the full therapeutic benefit.
True. Because the other thing about mushrooms is that in that cell wall, they also have a compound called chitin. And for those people who are unfamiliar with chitin, normally we think about chitin as it's what makes up the shell of a crab or other crustacean. But that particular chitin actually, they use calcium carbonate to build up their shell. Mushrooms don't, but there is some chitin in there. It does bind up some of the compounds in mushrooms. So cooking helps to break that down a little bit. The other issue really is that, one of the things about when you go to supplementation, for example, is that you have it's a dry product. It's been ground to a fine powder. So you have a tremendous amount of surface area. And when you're consuming anything, I mean, let's face it, just like if you make a soup, well, you've got those compounds in whatever you're got in your soup. Now they're in a form where they're readily available. You can take them in and they will go right to work almost immediately.
When you speak about beta glucans, I've always heard of the mucopolysaccharides as the component of the mushrooms that have the immune strengthening properties. Is that the same thing?
You know what? I'm not really that familiar with a mucopolysaccharide because that's not really what they talk about very often.
Okay, so
but what I would say is that beta glucans are polysaccharides,
Oh,
but
okay.
they are let's just say they're a subset in the sense that polysaccharides can be a lot of things. Like, for example, starches are polysaccharides. And that's a huge issue because, one of the great things about mushrooms is that, mushrooms have storage carbohydrates much the same as we do. They have glycogen. Plants produce starch as their storage carbohydrate. So two very different types of carbohydrates there. In fact, the other thing about mushrooms and eating mushrooms is that one of the major components of the carbohydrate in mushrooms is mannitol. Now, mannitol is a low glycemic index carbohydrate that will slowly work in your system. They've actually shown that mushrooms can be very good for people who are diabetics. They have a lot of fiber. They will fill you up, but they have a low glycemic index carbohydrate in there in this mannitol. So even people who are in fact diabetic or pre-diabetic or something like that, mushrooms are a good food for you.
So since we're on the immune strengthening properties, I know several practitioners who use mushrooms as part of a integrative cancer protocol. Which particular strains of mushrooms do you think are most effective as having some sort of an anti-cancer effect?
Well, you know what? I would say the species that you should look for in that sense would be maitake, uh, reishi, uh, turkey tail.
Okay.
Those three would probably be my top three there. Now shiitake is also been shown to have those properties, and the wonderful thing about shiitake or maitake is both of them, especially where you are in Southern California. I mean, you could probably go into any market in Southern California and find fresh shiitake and fresh maitake. I mean, reishi is not really something you're going to eat because it is hard and woody. So traditionally, it's made into a tea. But shiitake and maitake. So those four, I would say, really would be the top ones that I would recommend for people in that sense. And that is really the interesting part about these medicinal mushrooms is that in Asia they've actually produced some drugs based on these specific mushrooms, like, for example, turkey tail. There's a drug in Japan called PSK that's been developed from turkey tail, and a drug in Japan called lentinan, which has been developed from shiitake mushroom. So these mushrooms, there are that beta glucan, is that's part of what they have produced from these mushrooms. That is really the key here. And what they do is they use it as what we could call an adjuvant to a cancer therapy, which is you take it along with your therapy to help keep your immune system operating at a little bit higher level because it's being torn down by those, whether it be the chemotherapy or the radiation.
Are you familiar with AHCC?
I am, yes. And to tell you the truth, I don't know too much about that other than it is a proprietary type of product that is, they use different mushrooms to break down certain organic products into this final AHCC. Again, my company doesn't deal pretty much with those kind of products. I call that product and others like it a process-driven product where rather than being what we consider a natural or herbal type of supplement, it goes through multiple steps to reach its final state. And so it's quite different than most standard of your mushroom products, mushroom extracts.
I see. I did a little reading prior to this podcast, and I read that a couple of popular chemo drugs, paclitaxel and vinblastine, are actually synthesized from mushrooms.
Well, you know what, and this is interesting because and what I want to tell your listeners right now is what you have to remember is the mushroom is what we would call one plant part of an organism that has a couple of different plant parts. Mushrooms don't have seeds, they have spores. And those spores will be out in nature, whether in the soil or in wood. They will germinate into fine filaments. And when multiple filaments come together into, they will form and fuse, they'll form a network. And that network is called mycelium. That's the actual, what we would term a vegetative body of this organism. And that's what's out there. That's one of the primary decomposers we have in nature. It's breaking down organic matter out there and turning it into humus. Without it, we'd be, buried in all sorts of woody tissue and leaves and all sorts of organic matter. So we've got a spore, we've got this mycelium, which is the vegetative body. When conditions are right, like I was talking about earlier, here in the Pacific Northwest, where it's fall, the temperature goes down a little bit, it rains, humidity goes up pops a mushroom. So when you were talking about those particular drugs coming from a mushroom, actually, there are two divisions in this fungal kingdom, and one is what we would call perfect fungi, and those are the mushrooms. The other called imperfect fungi, which are what you might consider a mold. And the difference is that mold does not produce a mushroom. And that mold is where penicillin came from. So fungi have produced all sorts of really interesting compounds, and a lot of them come from these compounds or these types called imperfect fungi, or what we would just call molds. And normally when we see a mold, it's like on our bread or it's on like a piece of fruit, and we go, oh my God, it's a mold, throw it out, right? Well, that fungus has attacked that piece of fruit or that bread because it's getting older, the spores are there, they germinate. It's just doing its thing of, okay, I'm going to decompose this, right?
Right. So I was reading about how mushrooms can have antibacterial and antifungal effects, which is kind of interesting because sometimes I deal with patients that have mycotoxins, mold toxicity, and I usually tell them not to eat mushrooms because they're already having a problem with mold. But it looks like from some of the reading I did that mushrooms actually can help you to fight off toxic mold.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. They can. And remember, a mycotoxin, that's actually from, again, an imperfect fungus. And what happens is it's an aflatoxin. It comes from a specific mold, and it will invade moist grain. And so a lot of the aflatoxins that people get are from grain products because of this mold. I mean, so people, the people growing all those grains, they're constantly checking their grains for these aflatoxins. And the toxins, once this mold gets into the grain, it can produce these toxins, and aflatoxins are very toxic. I mean, it's very important that you never end up consuming them. You can get very sick from them. But I don't know whether you've heard too, there used to be a meme going around, and it was there for a long time, especially back in the 90s, where it was like, if you've got candida, don't eat mushrooms. And it's like, I know herbalists that treat candida with mushrooms. It's this whole idea of somehow like produces like, and it's an ancient idea that's more mythological than it is real. It's like, okay, I've got a fungal infection, but that means I shouldn't eat mushrooms.
Well, I think it comes from the concept that the first step to clearing out some toxin is stop getting exposed to it. So if you're in a moldy house, leave the house or, remedy it. And so avoiding foods that might have mold or mushrooms seems like that would be part of the same concept.
Yeah, but and here's the thing too, because when people are susceptible to molds, what we're talking about here is we're talking about molds growing in their house, on the walls, or somewhere, and what they are allergic to are the mold spores. because those molds, when you see, like, for example, a black mold, well, normally most molds start out and they're kind of whitish, but when they reach a certain point, they will mature, they will produce spores. And it's those spores which people are breathing in. They're not eating those spores, they're breathing them in, and that's causing this allergic reaction. And that's when people have this mold issue, and it's due to environmental factors. It is because they're actually breathing in the mold spores. And there's actually a thing called mushroom worker's lung. And what it is that some mushrooms, because a lot of mushrooms are grown indoors in large houses or warehouses, and if that cap of the mushroom is allowed to mature, the spores will come out and be in that environment. And if you're in there harvesting, you're in there for hours and you're breathing in all of these spores. It is a very bad environment to be in. And that's where really people that are harvesting mushrooms should always wear a respirator. And one of the reasons why the button mushroom that you see in the market, it is harvested before it actually matures and produces spores.
Interesting. So I know mushrooms can have beneficial effects on cholesterol. And I know red yeast rice is where statins come from, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's really, really interesting, because the oyster mushroom produces a lot of these statins. And what also is interesting is how the company that produced the drug had the FDA keep these red yeast rice products out of the markets, and were suing people that were putting them out there, because they said, no, you can't do that, because we sell statins and we've got patents and all of this. And isn't that crazy? Here it is, it's a natural product that has these statins in it, and yet they're going, you can't sell those. It's like, what? Oh, are you kidding me? No, oyster mushrooms have and they've got a good amount of them. I mean, people who have those issues could be putting oyster mushrooms into their diet and getting those benefits.
Cool. What about mushrooms that are beneficial for blood sugar regulation and diabetes?
Well, that's again, your maitake is the primary one for that. Although I think that's something, again, that gets back to the fact of mushrooms having this mannitol as one of their primary carbohydrates, because mushrooms are mostly carbohydrate. They've got 20 to 30% protein, so it's good quality protein, but that's not really why you're eating mushrooms. But they have this carbohydrate, and again, it gets back to the fact of mushrooms being very, very high in fiber. So if you want something to feed your microbiome, man, mushrooms are perfect for that, and they're very good for your microbiome.
Really? What form of mushrooms would you want to eat to promote your microbiome?
Well, any of them, because they're all very high in fiber. And that's one of the reasons too. Foods that are high in fiber, they're basically not super digestible. So what's happening is a lot of that food is just going right through and right down in the colon, and that will be your non-digestible fiber that goes to your microbiome. And if it's a good food, it will be essentially worked on there, and a lot of the benefits will come right out of the food at that point.
So I understand lion's mane has been touted as helping brain function, and I did some reading, apparently stimulates nerve growth factor.
Yeah, lion's mane. I tell you, we can't keep lion's mane in stock right now. I think in the US right now, everybody must be losing their memory. Because
we are seeing a rapid increase in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
I know. And that reminds me, I better start taking more of it every day, because I'm at that age. No, it's really interesting, because it's what I don't know if you've probably heard of this whole category now called nootropics.
Yes.
And that's becoming a huge category. Anything that helps us to function at a higher level. Now, the nootropic that I love the most is called coffee. And that's what I use in the morning to get me going, and it has that effect on me. But right now, lots of people want the lion's mane because of the whole memory benefits. And, I think we all could use that. I mean, it doesn't matter what age you are. We all think our memory's not quite sharp enough, right? And so lion's mane stimulates nerve growth factor. Nerve growth factor is something that we produce that then will actually stimulate the growth of neurites and neurons, which are nerve cells. And those nerve cells are constantly being destroyed and regenerated all the time. And unfortunately, as we get older, the destruction increases while the construction of new cells doesn't keep up. And that's where all of a sudden, what did you say your name was again? I forget, it's like those types of issues come up, and it's not really comfortable when you start to lose your memory, and it becomes a little more difficult. And so right now, certainly lion's mane, it's our top selling mushroom right now.
Now, is there only one type of lion's mane? That's number one. And then number two is, what is the best form and dosage? Is capsules better than tea versus powdered form versus, what is the best form?
Well, you know what? I personally think that when something is in a powder form, you just have that much more surface area. The thing with eating mushrooms, like eating any food, how long are you prepared to chew it? It's like, now if we all chewed our food up as much as we should, we'd be probably getting a lot more nutrients out of that food. So having that food in a powder form, I think, and supplement in that sense, is probably very good. So that's what I would say about the form. The other thing too is, there are clinical trials out there with lion's mane, which is really interesting because we don't get many clinical trials when it comes to actually any kind of herbal products, right? In Japan, they gave a group of people, elderly people in their 70s, 3 grams of lion's mane. They had a control group. They all took a test, a battery of tests. They continued to take the lion's mane powder, 3 grams, just 3 grams. That's not a lot. For 90 days, at the end of the 90 days, they tested them again. The people taking the lion's mane scored higher than the control group, and then as they did in the beginning. What was interesting about that was that after they stopped taking lion's mane, they tested everybody 30 days later. The people who had taken the lion's mane dropped back down to where they were previously.
I guess you're relying on natural light, Doc. You're starting to get washed out there.
Yeah. It's interesting. That will probably, and I'll just turn this over here because I'm facing south.
Yeah.
And so I've got the sun in my eyes right now, but I'll get back over here a little bit.
There you go. So how much would you say 3 grams? How much is 3 grams? Like, how much is that in terms of, say, tablespoons?
3 grams would probably be 2, or maybe a 1 heaping tablespoon.
Oh, okay.
Of lion's mane powder. Not
Do you
a lot.
think that would be the appropriate dosage to take 1 or more times a day?
Yes, absolutely. If you took that once a week, and look.
What if you're using it therapeutically for a patient in early stage dementia?
Well, you know what? I personally think that all of the herbal products and supplements out there, including mushrooms, that nobody ever takes enough. I mean, in traditional Chinese medicine, they would give people pretty significant doses of herbs because they wanted to see some activity. They wanted to see something happen. And you know what the way all the supplements are is like, okay, here's your 60 capsules, take 2 a day, and you end up like, okay, 1 gram a day of this product. And that's just because they want you to have a month's supply. And also they say, okay, take 2 capsules. Well, what if you weigh 120 pounds or 200 pounds?
Right.
Doesn't make sense, right? So, I mean, if you're a large man, you're definitely going to take a lot more than a normal sized woman.
Yep. Yeah. So what about mushrooms for sleep?
Reishi, absolutely reishi. Reishi's been a mushroom that's been used for a long time for insomnia, stress, to relax some. And you know, one of the things that I think everybody has to remember is that don't expect mushrooms to work immediately. That's not how they work. You
Okay.
have to be taking them for a while.
So let's say you have somebody who's dealing with insomnia and they've been trying some other things and now they're going to start using reishi mushrooms. How much should they take and how long trial do you think they should give it before they expect to see some results?
Oh, I'd say probably 2 to 4 weeks before you see any results.
Oh,
And I
wow.
would
So you
say
gotta
take 2 to 5 grams,
okay.
and you know 2 to 5 grams. That would be 2 grams would be, you know, in a lot of cases twice what they might tell you to take, because maybe they say 2 500 milligram capsules. Well, that's only 1 gram. So you know, don't under dose, so to speak. Be sure you're taking enough of this so that you know that in fact you're going to get sufficient to have some kind of activity.
So it might be say anywhere from maybe 4 to 12 capsules at night before bed.
Well, I would take it in the early evening, and also, you know, this gets back into, you know, what you're actually taking and making sure that you're taking the real thing and not something else, because there's so many products out there that are not the real deal and would end up being nothing more than a placebo.
Right. Well, how do we know if we're getting a real deal?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, my God, you go into one of the stores out there and you wander the shelves. Have you done that at Whole Foods or something? How does anybody ever know what to buy? It's like, how many choices do you need of everything?
Right.
You know, it's like, so you know, what I would say with mushroom products, and this is something that I address a lot, because there's a lot of mushroom products that are not actual mushrooms, and that's so important, because, you know, we talked a little bit before about mycelium and mushroom, very different things. There are companies in the United States that grow that mycelium on grain, sterile grain, in a laboratory.
What is the mycelium?
The mycelium is this vegetative body. And you know, one way to really picture this is, are you familiar with the food called tempeh?
Yeah,
You know,
vaguely, but I'm not sure what it looks like.
okay. Well, tempeh, if you've never eaten it before, tempeh is cooked soybeans
Right. It's kind
with,
of like a paste. Yeah.
it's kind of a block, but
Yeah.
it's cooked soybeans, and they grow a fungus on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and if you open it up, it's white, and that white part of the tempeh, which is growing all around the soybeans, is actually mycelium.
Okay.
Tempeh is actually a mycelium product. So people will grow let's just say a reishi tempeh, but instead of giving it to you as food, they will actually then dry it, grind it to a powder, grain and all. And then when you go to test it, it turns out that that product is mostly starch. But what they say on the label and what these companies claim is, oh, they'll sell it as mushroom. And it's not mushroom, it's mostly starch from all the grain in there. And so if that mushroom product says made in the USA, it is going to be that grain-based myceliated product.
So there's no good mushroom products made in the USA.
If it's made in the USA, no, there's not.
Wow, because
I know.
we're trained to want to avoid China because you hear about all the
Absolutely, I
the stuff
know,
that's
I
poor
know,
manufacturing in China and all the toxic
absolutely right. But
additives and
Dr. Weitz, look, do you want to go out to Long Beach and dip into the water out there in the port and have a nice swim? Do you want to go out in front of the river down there, the Tijuana River down in San Diego, and have a nice swim in the water down there?
no.
You know, it doesn't matter where you are. What really matters is whether the products that you're getting have been tested sufficiently. We grow and process all our products in China, back far away from the large cities, from the industry and all of that. And then we have to test them. And we test them before it leaves China. We test them again once it arrives over here. In 1997, I went to China with OCIA, the largest organic certifier in the United States, and we did the first organic certification for mushrooms in China, 1997. I totally believe in organic products. When I buy my fruits and vegetables, I'm going to a store that has organic fruits and vegetables. What do most people buy? Yeah, what do they sell in most supermarkets?
Yeah.
Well, most people buy the products that have been grown with pesticides and chemicals and so on and so forth, and
Genetically modified and sprayed.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And where are they produced? Well, a lot of them are produced in the United States. I mean, so for me, it's like, yeah, I've heard that a lot from people. And look, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are products and things from China that no, you don't want to consume them, absolutely. But I'm just saying, there's a lot of products in the U.S. that you don't want to be consuming either because they're just as contaminated.
So what do we look for on the label? Is there some sort of like certification, like certified by something? How do we know if a mushroom product is good?
Yeah, you know what? That's what's so crazy about it, because you can buy this myceliated grain product and it'll say vegan, kosher, organic, everything. It'll have all the merit badges.
The organic, really? Wow.
Yes, because they're using an organic grain to grow it, but they're growing it in a lab and it's just mycelium, and they don't take the grain out, so it's mostly starch. What you need to look for is this: a product that you won't see. All these products will say the same on the front panel. They'll say mushroom, and some of them will even say made with 100% organic mushrooms, even though they're not. If you turn it around the supplements facts panels, if it says mycelium, stay away. If it says mycelia in the other, in the fine print down at the bottom, in the other, if it says myceliated rice, myceliated oats, that's what you are getting. You're getting myceliated rice. You're getting this tempeh product. What you really want to look for is a product that says no mycelium, no grain, no starch. And a lot of products are starting to say that now because it's like, yeah, they know, and they know that people want the real thing. So that's really the issue. It's not these myceliated grain products. That's not what they've used in China for thousands of years. They've used actual real mushrooms, and that's where all these compounds are really made.
So the mushroom product should come from the fruiting body of the mushroom, not the mycelium, which is like the sort of root structure.
That's exactly right. And you put it right. The mycelium, for a lot of people, if you were ever to see it, it would look like a root structure, and it functions like a root structure because it's there supplying nutrients up to this mushroom. When you harvest the mushroom, the mycelium stays in the ground. Now, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna just harvest this plant that I've been growing, and not only am I gonna harvest the plant, I'm gonna harvest the roots and all the dirt around it. It's like, no, that's not what you want, right? You want the actual plant itself without what was in the ground.
Cool. So I think those are the questions I have. Any other things that you'd like to talk about today?
Well, you know what I'd like to do is just, mushrooms are kind of like one of those overlooked foods.
Yeah.
It's something that we're just catching up to right now in the United States and North America. In Asia, they've eaten dozens of mushrooms for thousands of years. When I go in the marketplace in China, there are at least 12 different mushroom species there that you can buy. And so that's something I think that we're missing in our diet. In a sense, I consider that the dietary missing link. So what I tell people is, look, before you supplement, and look, maybe you're having insomnia issues and you want reishi, fine. That's different. Get your reishi product. But before you supplement, buy mushrooms and start putting them into your diet. Cook them properly, but eat mushrooms. Mushrooms are a great food. They're high in B vitamins. The mushrooms for 100 grams or 4 ounces of mushrooms, you're going to get 25% of your RDA of a riboflavin and niacin.
Cool.
Out of 100 grams of fresh mushrooms.
What other nutrients do you get?
Well, you're also very high in potassium and phosphorus. Those are the two major minerals in mushrooms. And what's really cool about mushrooms is that they actually have a compound in there called ergosterol, which if you take a mushroom and slice it up and put it into the sun, the UV from the sun will turn ergosterol into vitamin D2. It's like, so if you want to slice up your mushrooms, stick them out there for 15 minutes, you're going to get probably 100 IUs of vitamin D2 from that. They're just a great food. And that's what I really like to tell people is put them into your diet. If you want to go a little deeper, you have some issues, especially immunological issues, try to supplement with them and, be very careful when you buy that mushroom product out there. Make sure it does not mycelium and it doesn't say on the other. It's got a lot of people don't eat grains anymore. They buy these products. They tell me about how much they love mushrooms, and then I ask them the brand, and I say, you know what? You're getting mostly grains. They're shocked, absolutely shocked.
Right.
So definitely. Think about that, and maybe even in your, because I know you're really a nutritional expert, and I'll send you some papers on mushrooms and nutritional values and stuff like that you can access. But maybe that's something you'd look at for some of your nutritional counseling.
That sounds good. So, do you want to give any links to contacts for you or your companies?
Sure. Yeah. You know what? My company's Namex, Nammex. Go to namex.com. We have a lot of information there about mushrooms, the benefits of medicinal mushrooms. Come to Namex. I've got slideshows on how our mushrooms are grown. And then we have a retail outlet called realmushrooms.com. You can go there and you can access our mushroom products right there at realmushrooms.com. You'll actually get real mushrooms.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
Dr. White, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.